Denny Hamlin is back in the purple and orange, and his former crew chief takes a shot at Richard Childress Racing. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. Happy Friday, folks. I'm feeling a little bit better today. We've got some stories to wrap up this week. Let's begin with Denny Hamlin. The number 11 car looks quite a bit different this year. No more FedEx, no Mavis Tire. Both sponsors departed at the end of last season. Fans took notice at Bowman Gray when the number 11 team rolled up in a mostly blank team hauler. The search for a new anchor partner continues, but this week, Joe Gibbs Racing announced they'd signed AM/PM, the West Coast convenience store chain, for 2 races. They will sponsor Denny Hamlin at Sonoma later this year and the fall, October, Las Vegas playoff race. Familiar purple and orange colors, but a brand new logo on board the number 11 Toyota. There continues to be debate and discourse around Denny Hamlin, but more broadly, Joe Gibbs Racing and how they handle sponsorship. Ever since M&M's left, and as a result, Kyle Busch signed with Richard Childress Racing, fans have wondered if Denny Hamlin's future with the team is as secure as we often thought. We don't know exactly what Denny Hamlin's contract situation is beyond this year, but we do know he's very successful, veteran driver. He commands a higher salary than most. It's important to remember that every driver's contract situation, every team's sponsorship situation is quite a bit different. Yes, for example, Joe Gibbs Racing struggled to find major sponsorship for Kyle Busch. He left for RCR, and he's got tons of sponsors. But more than likely, Kyle Busch took a pay cut, and you'll notice the RCR sponsors are whiskey, gambling, apps, and nicotine. Those kinds of sponsors don't necessarily fit Joe Gibbs Racing's vision. Every team has different guiding principles, so that's something to consider as well when looking at Denny Hamlin and his future. I have heard that he might be sold out of primary sponsorship for this year. That's what I've heard. Don't know if it's exactly true. If it is true, that certainly bodes well for Denny Hamlin's future job security, but if not, they're still chasing that anchor sponsor. Questions could come up sooner rather than later about Denny Hamlin's future. I hope he stays with Joe Gibbs Racing. He's a JGR lifer, I believe. I'd love to see him stay in that 11 car until he's ready to get out. Thinking about Kyle Busch for a moment, it is pretty crazy that when he was at Joe Gibbs Racing, it was M&M's, family-friendly, colorful brand. He goes to RCR and he's wearing a black fire suit introducing his own line of whiskey. The difference between RCR Kyle Busch and JGR Kyle Busch, pretty stark if you ask me. Anyway, something to consider when we get into more Denny Hamlin sponsorship discussions. No two situations, no two teams handle these exactly the same way. Speaking of Denny Hamlin and Joe Gibbs Racing, Hamlin's former crew chief, now JGR competition director, Chris Gabehart, responded to comments made by RCR crew chief Richard Boswell on SiriusXM NASCAR radio this week. Last weekend at Phoenix, of course, the option tire was the story. Each team got 2 sets of these faster, softer option tires that would wear out after 40, 50 laps. They could choose when to put those tires on during the race. Most teams were trying to wait until the very end so that they could have them for a short run, but it did introduce an added strategy element into last Sunday's race at Phoenix Raceway. Richard Boswell, crew chief now for Austin Dillon, Richard Childress Racing, praised the option tires on SiriusXM NASCAR radio this week. He said, quote, "The option tire is fun. It's fun for me to sit there on the box and try to understand how I can maximize my day. I'm a fan of the option tire being the standard tire and something even softer being the option." Chris Gabehart, again of Joe Gibbs Racing, posted this in response. He said, "Summary, he's a fan of getting to participate for the win via the caution lottery." Ooh, okay, we need to understand the 2 different agendas here so that we can remove bias from the situation. Richard Boswell, crew chief again, Richard Childress Racing. Austin Dillon is not usually in contention for the race win on a week-to-week basis. They view the option tire as an opportunity. We saw again at Phoenix, the option tires were so much faster than the prime tires for 40, 50 laps. Austin Dillon's brother, Ty Dillon, took advantage of the late race cautions, was able to save an extra set of option tires for the very end. If Ty Dillon doesn't speed on pit road late, he had a great shot at a top 5 finish, maybe even the race win. And that was all because they held off on their option tires as long as possible and caught some breaks with the cautions. But that's why Chris Gabehart, again of Joe Gibbs Racing, is not a huge fan of the option tire. It gives a 20th to 30th place team like Kaulig Racing a chance to beat the heavy hitters at JGR. If those teams catch a caution at the right time, it could be their lucky day. So both sides clearly have an agenda here. Look, I love a great underdog story as much as the next person, but I think I side more with Chris Gabehart. To quote, or at least paraphrase, his former driver Denny Hamlin, the option tires are just another opportunity for the best car not to win. The option tires were OP at Phoenix. They were way too fast, did not wear out quick enough. When Ty Dillon or Ryan Preece put on the option tires and rocketed through the field at different points last Sunday, that wasn't because they had a great setup. That wasn't even because the driver was doing anything all that exceptional. It was because they had the right set of tires on at the right time. Yes, there is a strategy element, but to Gabehart's point, you're kind of guessing late in the race when you should put your final set of option tires on. You're betting on when the last caution is going to fly. If the disparity between the option and the prime tires is going to be as drastic as we saw at Phoenix, then I'd rather just have one universal set of tires, preferably the option tires or something soft that wears. I don't want a playoff race, or certainly not the championship race, to come down to who catches a caution at the right time and saved a set of option tires. I don't want big races decided by teams guessing on when to put on their final set. That's my take. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing prime versus option tires used at some other short track races, maybe some road courses later this year. I just hope the disparity isn't quite as significant as it was at Phoenix. Y'all saw it. The option tires were way faster for 40 plus laps. I don't want to see that disparity in an important cutoff or playoff race late in the year. That's my opinion. But it's really interesting to see how a Richard Childress Racing versus Joe Gibbs Racing engineer differ. Everyone in the garage has their own somewhat selfish agenda. I want to wrap up this week talking a little bit more about Christopher Bell and just how happy he looks. Obviously he's happy because he's won 3 of the first 4 Cup Series races, but beyond that, Joe Gibbs decided to lift the ban on dirt racing late last year. Pressure from his grandson Ty, new addition Chase Briscoe, Bell, of course, led to Joe Gibbs making the call. And since then, since Bell has been able to return to his roots more or less, he's had a huge smile on his face all offseason. We haven't been able to wipe it off since. Kelly Crandall, writing, I believe, for ESPN, published a great article earlier this week. I'll link it down in the description below. It talks about the origins of the dirt racing ban. Joe Gibbs seeing Alex Bowman get injured, other drivers getting injured. Christopher Bell talked about the differences between how Hendrick Motorsports operates versus Joe Gibbs Racing. Hendrick's sponsorship and business is set up in such a way that they can afford to let Larson go run dirt racing. It's less risky for them as opposed to JGR and their contracts. Again, what did I say earlier? Every team does business a little differently. Rick Hendrick has a massive car dealership empire. That's where the Ally B2B deal comes into play. Exalta, Valvoline, I'm sure. Joe Gibbs Racing has some of that B2B infrastructure, I'm sure, especially since the Josh Harris Sports Group was involved, but it's to a lesser extent. I said this Sunday night after Phoenix, but I'm beginning to see parallels between Christopher Bell 2025 and Kyle Larson 2021. Kyle Larson in the year 2020 into 2021 was doing a ton of dirt racing, was driving anything he could get his hands on and winning in just about everything he could get his hands on. And that translated to a 10-win Cup Series season. He won the 2021 Series Championship. I'm not here to predict in March that Christopher Bell wins the title. We know there are so many variables late in the season. It's too early to predict something like that. But Christopher Bell has won 3 of the first 4 Cup races just after an offseason that saw his dirt racing prowess be fully unlocked once again. We're stacking up more evidence now that suggests racing during the week, racing dirt, makes drivers better on Sunday. Christopher Bell said in this article, quote, "You can't simulate race time. Being in the seat and making those split-second decisions that you have to make all the time, you can't deny that if you don't race for a period of time, your decision-making is not going to be as sharp as it could be." Also in this article, Adam Stevens, Bell's crew chief, agrees and said, quote, "You wouldn't ask a professional golfer to lock his clubs in the closet for 3 months over the winter and show up for the first tournament. I bet he wouldn't play very well." Yeah, I know this isn't a very scientific observation, but Larson in 2020, 2021, Christopher Bell so far in 2025. Maybe Christopher Bell is just in a better headspace. Maybe Joe Gibbs Racing is just giving him really fast cars and the timing is purely a coincidence. Or maybe Christopher Bell, who's entering his 6th season in the NASCAR Cup Series, 30 years old, is just now entering his prime. This is the sharpest his skills will ever be. His reaction time when combined with his current experience level are peak. Maybe it's the perfect storm. I mean, Kyle Larson was 29 years old when he went on that tear in 2021. Yeah, and because he missed most of 2020, that was his 7th full-time Cup Series season. So again, pretty similar to Bell. That's all I'm saying. Lot of similarities right now between 2025 Christopher Bell and 2021 Kyle Larson. Larson was the last purely dominant season we have seen from a NASCAR Cup Series driver. I think the spec next-gen car has something to do with that. But anyway, I just wanted to point out some of the similarities between Bell so far this year and Larson 4 years ago. I'm not here to predict Bell wins the championship. Again, too many variables to account for, but I wanted to at least make that observation. And I also wanted to point out that we have additional evidence now that racing dirt, running midweek off-season races sharpens your skills for Sunday. This isn't the most scientific experiment in the world, but I can see the evidence with my eyes, at least. Anyway, leave a comment down below. Do you think Christopher Bell has a real shot at getting close to or eclipsing Kyle Larson's double-digit win mark? Do you worry about drivers' safety racing during the week? Let me know down in the comments below. Leave a like while you're down there. Subscribe for more NASCAR content every single week. And a big thank you to my generous Patreon supporters. Have a great weekend, y'all. I will be back to talk Las Vegas Sunday night. Have a good one, folks.